Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my colleague, Forbes senior editor, Dan Alexander. Dan, thanks so much for coming back on.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Brittany.
You have some deep reporting about President Trump and his financial ties to Saudi Arabia, which you found date back to the 80s. And he was actually asked about this during a White House moment when he had a meeting with Saudi Arabia's crown prince. And a reporter asked the president point blank if it is, quote, inappropriate for your family to be doing business in Saudi Arabia while you're president. Is that a conflict of interest? And it seemed like President Trump really took offense to this question. He had a really testy response, and I want to read that in part. He said this: I have nothing to do with the family business. Then he added, quote, what my family does is fine. They do business all over. They've done very little with Saudi Arabia, actually. I'm sure they could do a lot, and anything they've done has been very good. That's what we've done. We've built a tremendous business for a long time. I've been very successful. I decided to leave that success behind and make America very successful. Based on your reporting, is what President Trump's saying true here when it comes to his involvement in his family's business dealings, as well as his family's business dealings with Saudi Arabia?
Absolutely not true. Donald Trump is very involved in his business in that he still owns it. If you own it, you're involved in it, okay? It still matters to you. You're still a part of it. If you look at the entities through which Donald Trump holds his assets, which he discloses on federal filings, in most of them, he still owns 100% of these entities, and his family does not own any of them. There are a couple of deals in which his family has a small sliver, 20%, and he still owns 80%. If you look at those documents, these two things can't be true. Either he's filing false documents saying that he owns these assets, or he's lying when he says that he has nothing to do with his business. I tend to believe the documents, not what he says in the Oval Office.
And so we're believing the documents here. How much has him as well as his family benefited from their financial ties with Saudi Arabia?
Well, if you look in 2024, there's one partnership that's been really critical for them for expanding their global real estate licensing business. That's with a company called DAR Global, which is based in Saudi Arabia. DAR Global in 2024 paid Donald Trump about $21 million. And they've announced many deals since then. So it wouldn't be surprising if they pay him that much or even more this year. And there are indications that there are still more deals coming down the line. We're already now at 7. It wouldn't surprise me if we ultimately get up to 10, 15 deals with this Saudi company. That's just the real estate licensing business. You also have the golf business. So Live Golf, which is a Saudi-backed competitor to the PGA Tour, really brought professional golf back to Donald Trump's courses. After January 6th, the PGA Tour and the Royal and Ancient, which oversees the British Open, both submitted statements sort of distancing themselves from Trump, saying that they weren't doing any events at his courses, at least not in the foreseeable future. Live Golf, however, comes onto the scene right as those two are out and says, hey, we're looking for golf courses that are nice that we can send a bunch of pros to. And they do a series of events at Trump's courses, bringing big names to his courses, which sort of gives him the prestige. Not a ton of money. It adds up to about $6 million by our estimates, but the prestige of having big names, big golfers at his courses.
I do want to walk down memory lane, if you will. Let's start with the 1980s. I do want to talk about President Trump's the beginning of his financial dealings with the Saudis. That's when you pinpoint it. So take us back to 1987 and then bring us to 2015, right before he jumps into politics.
Sure. Well, if you go back to 1987, Donald Trump has a yacht called the Trump Princess, but it wasn't always called the Trump Princess. It was originally called, I think, the Nabila. And it was commissioned by a guy named Adnan Khashoggi. Coincidentally, that actually happens to be the cousin of Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist who was killed and dismembered in the Saudi consulate in Turkey. But Adnan Khashoggi had an enormous yacht, 282 feet long, and Donald Trump ended up buying that yacht. Donald Trump and various Saudi, business people and royals did business like that, and sort of, you like big toys, I like big toys. Let's do deals together, sort of thing. Another instance of it is in the mid 1990s. Donald Trump is in big financial trouble, and part of the trouble is the Plaza Hotel, which he says that he overpaid for, and in fact did overpay for. It ended up going into bankruptcy, and then in the mid 1990s he has to get rid of it. Well, one of the buyers that he sells it to is Prince Awalid, who's a relative of the royal family in Saudi Arabia. In 2001, the Saudi government is looking for apartments that they can put their diplomats in when they're at the UN headquarters. Donald Trump has a massive building very close to there called Trump World Tower, big black rectangular obelisk standing on the east side of Manhattan. The country of Saudi Arabia purchases the entire 45th floor, 5 apartments, 10,000 square feet, and pays Donald Trump an estimated $12 million to do so. So there are various sort of interactions like that in the old days. Then if you come up sort of to the campaign times, right after he launches his campaign, there are a series of companies that have the name Jeddah in them that Donald Trump creates. And they're structured in ways, the names are structured in ways that sound similar to other licensing deals that he has around the globe, suggesting that maybe he was working on a licensing partnership while he was running for president the first time. And I think that that's where he told me to stop my timeline.
Yes, I did. And I want to read a quote that you point out from 2015. President Trump was on the campaign trail. He mentioned Saudi Arabia, and this is what he said. Saudi Arabia, and I get along great with all of them. They buy apartments for me. Am I supposed to dislike them? I like them very much. So reflect on that quote 10 years ago, what it means to you today, looking at it now, and then talk to us about that relationship and how it changed, if it did, once President Trump entered the political landscape.
Well, it's a reflection of Donald Trump as a real estate developer, knows where the money is. And if you're a big time real estate developer in New York, you're going to see money coming in from various parts of the world because New York City has always been sort of a destination locale for people to buy apartments. And as I mentioned, in Donald Trump's case, he sells 5 apartments for $12 million to the Saudi government. It's obvious that if you're a government that's buying millions of dollars of worth of apartments, an entire floor in this building across from the UN, that you've got some money. And Donald Trump recognizes that, and he still recognizes that. Although the relationship has changed, has intensified in many ways, one thing has always remained constant. Saudi Arabia has had a ton of money. Donald Trump knows it, and he respects them for it.
And to that point, President Trump's first international trip in his first term, as well as his first international trip in his second term, both were to Saudi Arabia, which really kind of bucks precedent, right? Normally, presidents go to traditional allies. Now, President Trump, he made his way to the Middle East. Do you think that was more about strategic foreign diplomacy, or do you think that was more a money move?
Well, how do you separate the two, right? So in Trump's eyes, what's important strategically, what's important diplomatically is who has the money. And so you're right, the first place that he goes is to the country that's got the money. And, over the course of his first term, Saudi Arabia is very important for a number of reasons, but principally because they control large amounts of the global oil supply. And Donald Trump gets on the phone and calls up the king of Saudi Arabia at various points and says, hey, can you help us with the price of gasoline, basically, to help out his presidency? He knows that it's important because they have money. And yeah, it's a sign of respect that he goes there first.
And then let's talk about the time that President Trump wasn't president any longer, from 2021 to 2024. I mean, what did his relationship with Saudi Arabia look like then? And then also, what were the business dealings?
Just to set the stage, so Donald Trump in his first term, he said that he wasn't going to do any foreign deals. And that really sort of closed off an avenue of growth for his company. They have been doing licensing deals all over the world. The assumption was that at the end of his first term, that he would get right back into it, that he would have made all these contacts all over the world, and people would be yearning for the Trump name on their various projects or buildings around the globe. What happens instead is on his way out the door, January 6th, sort of sullies this Trump name. And all of a sudden, nobody wants a Trump name on their projects. People are prying the Trump name off of their projects. It's a very, very difficult brand to sell. However, a couple of years later, in Oman, a Saudi company, Dar Global, announces the first Trump branded deal. This was sort of an early indication that, wait a second, this licensing business might not be dead after all. And as Trump's campaign progresses, Dar Global of Saudi Arabia announces more and more deals. In sort of the summer of 2024, right as he's kind of vanquished Joe Biden, and it looks like he's much more likely to become a possible president, Dar Global announces a deal inside Saudi Arabia in the city of Jeddah. After he wins the election in December, they announced 2 more deals in Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia. Once he takes office, they continue announcing deals all over the world, but including a fourth in Saudi Arabia in Jeddah. So clearly, Saudi Arabia has been a major part of sort of the global ambitions of Donald Trump, almost like a feeder country for the rest of the world. I mean, there are a lot of deals in Saudi Arabia, but there are also now a lot of deals around the globe by a firm from Saudi Arabia.
And now, 10 months into President Trump's second term here, what has changed with this relationship as well as his business dealings, especially when it comes to Saudi Arabia? Are they just more out in the open?
Well, they're much more linked financially, the two, Donald Trump personally and Saudi Arabia. They also are linked through his family. Jared Kushner has taken billions of dollars for his private equity fund and gets to charge management fees on that. Don Jr. has a private equity fund where he's a partner of, and he was recently in Saudi Arabia. So there are all sorts of financial links. And then from an official capacity, yeah, I mean, in 2018, when Jamal Khashoggi died inside of the Turkish consulate, it sort of made Saudi Arabia an untouchable in the international community. And Donald Trump, in the second term, enough time has passed and their links have gotten closer, and he sort of puts that all aside and says, no, you've got the money, we respect you, we want to do as much business with you as we possibly can. Come to the White House, we'll take out the horses, I mean, really puts on a show to indicate that we've come a long way in the U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia from 2018, and they're ready to push forward and do a lot of business together.
I do want to talk about Khashoggi because President Trump, in his Oval Office meeting, he said that the Crown Prince is doing an incredible job when it comes to human rights. But we know that MBS has a really dodgy track record when it comes to human rights. A U.S. intel report found in 2021 that the Crown Prince approved of Khashoggi's murder. And we know that Khashoggi was dismembered with a bone saw. And when it comes to a question on Khashoggi in the Oval Office, President Trump got really defensive, even more so than when MBS eventually answered the question. And President Trump said, as far as this gentleman, meaning MBS, is concerned, he's done a phenomenal job. You were mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. He's talking about Khashoggi there. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. And things happen there. He's referring to someone who was murdered and dismembered. And according to United States intelligence, MBS was the person who approved of that murder. What do you make of President Trump backing him here? Is that based on money?
Well, look, the whole relationship's based on money. Okay. The question is whether it's based on his personal money or based on the country's money. But there's no question that what he cares about is money. And it's not figuring out, assessing the difference between how much that's driven by the millions of dollars that he's personally receiving from Saudi Arabia and private companies in Saudi Arabia, and how much is because Saudi Arabia and its companies are putting, now what they're saying is $1 trillion of investment into the United States, is an impossible exercise. But there's no question that the foundational level of this relationship and the reason that Donald Trump is willing to forget about what happened in 2018 and contradict the intelligence community on what happened in 2018 is for financial reasons. He's driven personally and as president by the potential financial returns that Saudi Arabia can provide because it has an enormous amount of oil money.
I want to talk about Jared Kushner because he is, according to your reporting, someone who has benefited exorbitantly through his business dealings with the Saudis. He's also someone that worked to make that Gaza peace deal happen. He worked with the U.S. envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. And this is something that Kushner said. You pointed it out in your reporting. What people call conflicts of interest, Steve and I call experience and trust relationships that we have throughout the world. What do you make of that? Are there conflicts of interest here?
Look, Jared Kushner has taken $2 billion of Saudi money at least into his firm. He charges 1.25% management fees on that. So that's $25 million of management fees per year. It's a 5-year deal, so that adds up to about $125 million. That's a lot of money, and this is for a guy who didn't have, a stellar investment track record. before any of this. So really the Saudi money was critical for him in sort of his post White House career. What's been especially unusual is that despite forming that post White House career and not returning back in an official capacity, the president has asked him to play a major role in one of the most important diplomatic relationships in the world. And Jared Kushner has said that talking with Arab leaders around the region was essential in their negotiations for what was going to happen in Gaza. Now, again, what's tricky here is that we don't know exactly how his financial relationship played into those negotiations. Historically, we don't have to ask because diplomats get rid of their investments. They don't do billions of dollars of business with, foreign countries with whom they're negotiating. In this case, we don't know which decision they made that might be influenced by money or not. We just know that it's a huge potential problem, and we're left wondering whether all of these dealings were totally clean or whether there was something a little off there.
And you've been following the money trail when it comes to President Trump now for years. When you're looking at the money trail and his financial ties as it relates to Saudi Arabia, what specifically are you looking out for next?
The thing that I'm really curious about is how many new deals Donald Trump strikes with Dar Global and other firms from Saudi Arabia and where those are. So just earlier this week, they announced a new deal in the Maldives with Dar Global. What was really fascinating about that deal is that the CEO of Dar Global is a guy who's been sort of obsessed with this concept of tokenization of real estate, basically selling off real estate as digital assets. It's a serendipitous partnership because the Trump family, after he was obsessed, has fallen in love with crypto as well. And so earlier this week, they announced this deal that they're going to do in the Maldives, and they're going to sell off this real estate development in a tokenized fashion as digital assets. And what's going to be fascinating is whether that increases the value of the development. In other words, if you're a sophisticated bank or a very wealthy person, you might be willing to pay X to invest in a Trump development. But what if you're a foreign state or a foreign actor or just a Trump fan who really wants to be a part of one of his projects? Are you going to scrub those numbers as carefully, or are you willing to throw even more money at it? It could be sort of a novel way of translating what would have been maybe a ho-hum development into a massive moneymaker for Donald Trump. If they're able to replicate that formula, if it proves successful around the Middle East and around the world, it could be a tremendous benefit for the president financially.
Dan, I really appreciate your reporting here. Thank you, as always, for coming on. Until next time.
Thank you.